Hello and good morning. I hope you don't mind, but I have split this presentation into two parts. I decided to do this because the first project was very relevant to this application, but a fair bit of time has passed since 2009, so I wanted to add something a bit more relevant as well, so I've added that as the second part. First up we have Shapwick Heath, and as a quick rundown of the site, Shapwick Heath is a national nature reserve in an area of Somerset referred to by a lot of people as the Avalon Marshes. It is a wetland site and a triple SI, and if not actually unique, it is very unusual. Mostly because it was once an industrial peat works, and the neighbouring plots still are, though luckily it is being phased out if it has not already. It is below sea level, so it does have a high level of quite complex management to maintain its biodiversity. It's a big site at just under 1,000 acres, but it borders West Hay Marshes run by the RSPB and a few other preservation areas, so I believe the total footprint of the entire reserve area is about 4,000 acres. It's a big deal for a lot of wetland species, but only a percentage of it is actually open water. There is also wet woodland, wet meadows, marshes, bogs, culverts, streams, and many other niche environments. Basically, if it's wet, the levels has it, all the way up until you hit the salt marshes of the channel. As you can see from this aerial photograph, although nature thrives here, it isn't actually a naturally occurring landscape. All those straight lines, you can definitely tell. Humans have been tinkering with this since Neolithic times, and it's 100% man-made and man-maintained, which brings us to our main topic. Its modern reincarnation as a wetlands nature reserve has made it hugely successful for aquatic mammals, especially these guys and these guys. The Waterfall project was a key part of the management plan when I arrived at Shapwick Heath as a warden's assistant to John Macaulay. Sorry, I don't have a picture of him, it was a very long time ago, but he is one of the reserve manager at the time, Simon Clark. At the time I joined the team, it was already confirmed that there were waterfalls on site and that they were prevalent in some areas but not in others. It was also well known that there was a significant and detrimental mink population. I believe that had been known for a very long time. The first step to achieving the desired outcomes was to do more in-depth surveying. Surveying over such a large area was a pretty big undertaking, even for an organisation like Natural England, so training volunteers was absolutely vital. A major part of my role was to assist in the weekly volunteer tasks of between 4 and 10 people, and we devoted almost a month to learning, teaching, and building these floating mud traps, or mud traps that could be put in various locations around the site. We also had a really heavy emphasis on teaching people to spot animal tracks and signs, specifically for the target species that we were looking for, but also for a whole variety of different species. And then we spent about 2 weeks, I believe, in sort of mid to late summer surveying, well, as many places as we could reasonably access. It was pretty challenging. Shapwick isn't the most accessible of sites in all areas. Some of it requires a boat, some of it is just plain inaccessible, but we did target riverbanks specifically in order to find out what kind of population we already had for the watervole species. I think one of the most successful parts of the project, which I will happily admit that I didn't really realise at the time and have only subsequently realised it was so successful looking back, was Simon Clark's, the reserve manager's, enthusiasm for working in partnership with other groups, agencies, locals, and basically anyone who had any connection or interest in the land. He was a very likeable guy and he had a lot of contacts, so he invited specialists in animal tracking from other sites to teach us all how to build mud traps and how to understand our target species and how they interacted with their environment. And then, based on that knowledge, we ran workshops that he invited all other landowners in the area to, no matter how big or small they are, to learn how to do the same, and they took those mud traps for free away with them. This was quite a novel idea at the time. I think I'd never seen anyone else do it, but it allowed the project to work over a much larger area and provided a surprisingly large quantity of survey data, including photographs of the various footprints and footprints of other species. I believe that many of the landowners also did their own mink control, allowing us to have a greater impact on the area as a whole, and not just the sites and areas that we could directly access. The mink control and the surveying were a continuous part of the autumn and winter season for the time that I was at Shapwig. The warden and myself would go out early each morning and each evening to check both the survey traps and the catch traps, and to document all the results. If we were looking back on this, I assume these logs were used to help decide which areas were priority spots for the practical tasks. I didn't know that at the time because I was just an assistant, but looking back on it, it was a really clever way to proceed with the management plan. The second part of the project that ran in conjunction with the former part was the practical habitat work, and this involves working with the volunteer teams again to do large-scale scrub clearance and restoration of the many ditches, streams, culverts and bank sides. Partly this was to maintain the water flow, which is necessary for all kinds of things, and partly to provide a better habitat for the water vole's major food sources, to help better support the population. They do need some cover, but they also favour banks with really lush, tall-growing foliage, so a lot of scrubland and woodland encroachment had to come out. It was carefully done, and I trusted my superiors to make sure that we were doing the right thing here. Some large-scale work was also done with heavy machinery to restore the culverts. Miles and miles of culverts, and some of it were far too far gone to be done with hand tools. As I was just an assistant back then, I was much more on the practical side of the project, and I don't recall the figures of how successful this project turned out to be. I think perhaps it was still ongoing when my time at Shapwick finished. I did, however, notice a definite decrease in the numbers of mink that we trapped the following year, and that the amount of watervole burrows, latrines and food caches that we found in the following year's surveys was definitely increased. It was certainly very successful in engaging the volunteers, the local community, and in building important relationships with other stakeholders. In review, I guess, there was a lot of things that were so successful about this project which I didn't really realise I was learning so much about until I worked for other organisations and projects, and realised that this was a particularly good, well-managed and successful project, and that's why I chose to talk about it at this interview. There's a lot of things that I learned here early on which I later came back to in subsequent roles. And that leaves me all of 2 minutes to talk about the success of the Foxwood project, and it's going to be a bit rushed, so I'm really sorry about that. I am the outdoor project lead at the Foxwood project, and it is my passion project and has been for the last 2 years. I helped create it from scratch with 2 other colleagues, and it is the sum of our collective knowledge and experience in response to a local need for such an organisation to exist. It has a dual purpose, bringing the community together to tackle mental health and social isolation by spending time outdoors, making a positive difference to local habitats. The project has been hugely successful, engaging with the local community by organising activities, events, task days and workshops alongside a strong online Facebook presence. We've also created many new ways for the community to interact with each other, such as the seed swap, growing competitions, clubs, and always with a focus on helping the environment. So we started 3 years ago with absolutely nothing, complete El Zilcho. So we wrote all the company protocols, legislation, and put ourselves together as a real organisation. We set about fundraising, we recruited volunteers, and we convinced the local council and landowners to let us take on a big local problem. And that problem was an acre of derelict allotments that had been levelled about 10 years ago due to drug and alcohol and antisocial behaviour. It also had become used as a fly tipping site, so there was a huge amount of waste litter here and absolutely unspeakable things that had just been thrown into a habitat. So we cleaned it up, we surveyed it, and we made a management plan. And now it looks like this. We've had quite a lot of success setting up a diverse range of habitats and making it a haven for wildlife as an eco-garden and organic veg plot. Hot on the heels of people realising that actually we were quite a good project who were capable of a lot of things, we were asked to take on a second site down at Skinner Grove. So we did. And we restored it, and we now use it as an easy access teaching and volunteer facility, a lot of which is to do with the organic horticulture, basic learning about biodiversity, and we use the polytunnel to cultivate plants. Part of the success of the project isn't just the practical, it's about the impact we have locally. We make and build strong local connections with other landowners and organisations. We give back to the community. We created paid trainee roles for young people and have trained 5 people so far who have all gone into employment and 1 onto full-time arboriculture. When we first started out on this journey, basically people would rather laugh at us than even rent us a shed. And now we have 2 sites, a vehicle, a workshop, a polytunnel, and a full complement of tools and machinery. We bring in our own grant funding and are well respected locally. We have a robust volunteer group, and our sites are already beginning to attract and support a wider variety of species. And as if all of that wasn't challenging enough, we did it all during a national pandemic. So in review, I feel like although it was very challenging, it was really, really hard, it was also very successful.